Hello, children. Welcome to Clay Time with Mr. Barnes. We're going to talk about glazing today. We just had all the pinch pots coming out of the kiln. The first thing we're going to do when we're getting ready to glaze is take our bisque project and wash it. Okay, that's enough. Get a close up on this. That's enough. We just want to make sure there's no dust on the project. And you can see that it's starting to dry really rapidly. That's part of why glazing works. Glazing is not, or glaze is not like paint. What it really is ground up glass forming materials that are made into a powder, and then it's mixed with water. And then when you glaze your projects, that powder kind of sticks to the bisqueware, and then water gets absorbed into the bisque. So that's how it stays on there until we put it in the kiln, and when it goes back in the kiln, all those glass forming materials melt, and that's what makes the color. So it's more like a chemical reaction than it is a pigment, because you gotta get a close up of this. So here's a bucket of powder blue gloss glaze. Does that look powder blue? You got a nod. No? No? Okay, there we go. All right. That's what it looks like. So what do we got to do? What do you think we got to do? Oh, that's gross. We got to mix it. So that powder will settle to the bottom of the bucket, and it has to be remixed into the water. Some of the powders settle a little bit harder than others, but it should look like kind of the consistency of cream when you've mixed it all the way. Okay, do you agree? All right. Now, if I was glazing a bunch of stuff, what I would probably do, or if I was glazing things with my whole table and we were all going to use the same color, I would strain this glaze so you get the little chunks out of it. So there are all kinds of strainers in the back. There are clean buckets. You want to make sure it's clean first. But you could strain that, and that ensures that you have a really even glaze for glazing. There's a couple of different ways that you can glaze. The first way is to dip it. So these are called dipping tongs. You can gently, if your project is small enough, you can gently grab it like that, and then you dip it in, and you shake off the drips. But I'm gripping this firmly, but also gently. If I pinch too hard, I could break my bisqueware project. Okay, if I do it that way, I have one big problem. I didn't get a sponge. Give me a sponge, a big one, a clean big sponge. You don't got a filter, that's fine. Okay. If there was glaze on the bottom, you need to take a damp sponge and you would wipe the glaze off of the bottom, which I didn't. There's no glaze on here, so that didn't work. But we want to make sure that there's no glaze on the bottom of our projects. If there is glaze on the bottom of the projects, and I told you when we put it in the kiln, it gets hot and it melts, what will happen if there's glaze on the bottom of your project? The glaze melts, and then what? It's going to stick to the shelf, and it will glue itself permanently to the shelf. I have to break the shelf off, or I have to break this off of your shelf, which almost always damages or ruins the shelf. And those shelves are $90 a piece. So we can't afford to be ruining shelves. So your pot bottoms have to be clean, okay? Which is the better way of glazing, which is why I had you all make feet. So if you have a foot on your project, it gives you something to grip. So I'm gonna take a little clean bowl. I do have a hole in the bottom of this one, so I'm gonna plug the hole with my finger for just a second, and I'm gonna fill up the inside, and then I'm gonna swirl that glaze around on the inside, and then I'll quickly just pour it all out. I moved my finger a little bit, but that's fine. Okay, give it a little shake, and then with my grip, I'm gonna dip that in until it gets all the way up to the foot, but I'm not gonna glaze the foot. give it a little shake, and then you can set it down on the table. And in a few minutes, this will dry, and it'll be dry enough that you can pick it up and touch it. The other way that you can glaze is by painting. So if you were going to paint your glaze, you would do that, but look in here, see all the little kind of chunks? That's why you would glaze, or you would want to strain your glaze. It's not a huge issue, but it does make your glazes look better. If you wanted to paint your project, let's say you wanted to paint, I have another one here. Let's say you wanted to paint this design so that the triangles were one color and the other triangle was another color. You could paint it just like you would regular paint, but it takes 3 coats and probably 4. Okay, if you don't do enough coats of glaze on here, your glaze will be too thin and it'll be really ugly. I pulled this project because this is a really good example. Getting here close, a little close up. It's a really good example of what it looks like when you don't score and slip your projects. This foot ring just came right off. Now, because it's like that and gravity will hold on the inside of this and put the foot back on there, and the glaze will glue your foot back on, but that's not an ideal way of dealing with it. Make sure that you're scoring and slipping really well before it gets bisque fired. Okay, this is dry now. So what I can do is just take a damp sponge. And just clean up the bottom and make sure that if I'm not glazing the foot, that I've wiped all the glaze off of the foot. I'm gonna make sure there's no glaze on the foot. So just a damp sponge will work. And we can get all of that glaze out of there. So nice clean bottom. That's what we want, nice clean bottom. Again, I'm gonna have a reject shelf out there for projects that don't have their names on them, but glazed projects will also be rejected if there is glaze on the bottom. If there's glaze on the bottom, I'm not gonna fire it. I'll just put it on the shelf, and if you see your project there, there's a reason. Either you have glaze on the bottom or you didn't have your name on your bisque fired project. Okay, one last note on glazes. Some of the glazes are in buckets or jugs like this, and these are only paint. You can't dip into these glazes. They're much thicker. It still takes 3 coats, and these are not necessarily better. They're just formulated differently. But you cannot go by the color that you see. So what color is this?
Red.
It's red, right? This is actually ancient jasper. And ancient jasper looks like this. That's ancient jasper, not red at all, okay? So you cannot go by the color that you see in the bucket or in the jug. You have to go by the name. And you can look it up online. You can look up the name of the glaze and you can see a picture of what it looks like. But I think that covers it for glazes. Okay? All right, back to work.